Hello again. So just want to quickly try to talk a bit about B12 and why, if you follow this channel, you ought to consider supplementing with B12, or the kinds of conditions whereby one might want to consider supplementing with B12. So reason number one to supplement with B12 would be you are plant-based, and B12 can only be obtained really in animal-based products. All the research across the board consistently indicates that you really can't get B12 from a plant-based diet. And just a little explanation of that. It's not actually the animal product itself that has the B12. It's the fact that the bacteria that are working on in the digestive process on the animal create the B12. And therefore, and it gets secreted, it's in the colon. So it's beyond where you absorb. So therefore, we actually make B12. We just don't get access to it because it goes out the chute with the poop. So basically, we have not yet figured out how to get the B12. Maybe someday we will figure this out. So animal products, the only source really for B12, or supplements of some sort, fortified foods. Therefore, if you are long-term plant-based, you will become deficient in B12. So you must supplement with B12. So that's something to know. Reason number one. Reason number two, if you have HPA axis dysregulation, dysfunction going on, then again, you're also in the category of people who are likely to become deficient in B12. Why is that, you say, Jen? Well, so one of the issues is when you're under chronic stress, the glucocorticoids end up causing oxidative damage in the whole axis, as we talked about. And part of the oxidative stress, the oxidative damage, is the increase in an inflammatory marker called homocysteine. Homocysteine is a marker that we look at cardiovascularly in particular, or just inflammation. And what happens is, as it goes up, so goes up your increase for cardiovascular events. We're not talking the gala with the long black dress and the stiletto heels and the hot boyfriend, right? Talking about an event, a clot being thrown in a blood vessel that you need the blood to flow in, such as to your heart or your brain or your lungs, right? Organs that are not really disposable. So a clot, an event in that scenario, is a bad thing. You want to avoid that. And like I said, homocysteine is a marker. As it goes up, so goes the risk of events. Therefore, we don't want homocysteine to go up. Well, in the body, you have a couple of pathways where you sort of convert homocysteine into a less problematic form and sort of recycle it. The cofactors in these little pathways are B12, folate, and B6. And so you want those nutrients available enough to kind of keep the wheels churning, because then you keep your levels of homocysteine lower, thus decreasing your risk for cardiovascular events. If you don't have enough of those cofactors, then like I said, it'll bottleneck, it'll go up. Another way that you can actually increase the homocysteine would be through your diet. If you're eating a diet that's high in methionine, which happens in a lot of animal products, then you will increase, the byproduct of that is homocysteine as well. So you can bottleneck it that way as well, by having just so much to process that it turns into lots of homocysteine. So, like I said, if your HPA axis is under chronic stress and you're driving up that homocysteine from the chronic stress on the system, on the axis, then you're going to have an increased need for more B12. Also folate and B6, but like I said, B12 is the one you cannot get from your plant-based diet that you're consuming, also to decrease the stress to your axis, right? So that's another reason to supplement with B12. A third reason would be just if you look at the constellation of symptoms around complex PTSD, B12 tends to be something that helps. For example, circadian rhythm gets thrown off with PTSD, right? The flashbacks, the nightmares, the just the stress of the relationship you left with the narcissist, right? That piece tends to mean that your sleep is dysregulated. What we see with B12 is that it actually helps reset the circadian rhythm. And so, sounds like a good reason to supplement with B12 right there. That's piece one symptom. A second symptom that happens a lot with PTSD would be sexual dysfunction. And there is a mechanism. In fact, I came across a study in considering this video where B12, HPA axis dysfunction, B12 and the androgens were all looked at. And what was found is that the glucocorticoids being persistent and stressing out the HPA axis will actually decrease the efficiency of the Leydig cells. The Leydig cells are the cells that secrete testosterone. And so if they're not efficient, then you're going to run into problems like erectile dysfunction. You're going to have issues like low sex drive, low testosterone from that scenario. And it's going to be this crossover through the HPA axis where you're going to see that happening in PTSD type situations. So B12 actually helps support the Leydig cells and increases their efficiency. B12 actually, we think, binds to the androgens in general. And so that's another reason to supplement with B12 in this scenario. A third reason would be, again, if you have complex PTSD going on, you're at a greater risk of depression. Of course, PTSD is basically a form of anxiety, so of course anxiety as well. And that can exacerbate, deficiency in B12 can actually exacerbate depression. And so making sure that there are adequate levels of B12 in the face of complex PTSD is going to help support the restabilization of the HPA axis, as I just mentioned. So the one caution would be, again, as I mentioned, there are those 3 nutrients that are cofactors. If you supplement with B12 and you have an underlying folate deficiency, then you can actually mask that problem. So this is something to either be tested to make sure you're not deficient in folic acid before supplementing with B12, or if you're following a plant-based diet, then you're very unlikely to become deficient in folate. The reason being, things that have folate in them tend to be plants, all sorts of plants, legumes, greens. Your folate status is going to be great if you're plant-based. If you're paleo and avoiding beans, then again, you could potentially supplement with B12. You could potentially mask a folate deficiency. So worth considering. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for all your support. Audio.